I'm Andrew Hughes from Trophy Ridge, and I'm here today to talk about the SWFT series sights. The SWFT series sights are a mover or slider style sight that we came out with this year. They're very lightweight, they're the lightest in our lineup, and they're constructed of both 6061 aluminum and a magnesium alloy. It just makes them really light and maneuverable. We come out with a single pin version, one we call the Duo that has 2 pins, and a Trio, which is again our tried and true 3-pin housing. Each sight comes with its own set of sight tapes, both for wheel mounting as well as a vertical tape mounting location. And I'd really like to get into today how you actually set up your sight, both sighting it in and choosing a proper sight tape. All right, so moving on to sighting in your single pin SWFT sight. First thing you're going to do after you remove the sight from the package is use the provided screws and attach it to the riser or the bow you're shooting. In this case, I've got this sight mounted here to an execute. And then you're going to roll this sight all the way to the top position. It's really important that you start at the top when you're sighting in this sight, so in any sight really. Then you're going to take the toolless micro windage and elevation adjustments here, and you're going to sight in at 20 yards with this sight and then lock it down after you're done. So now there are a couple different options. We provide sight tapes for both the wheel and vertically on this sight, and the sight tapes are labeled by speed, starting at 190 feet per second all the way up to 325 feet per second at 5 feet per second increments. So what you can do if you have access to a chronograph is you can shoot this bow through a chronograph and reference the speed that you got. So let's say that you shot your bow through the chronograph 3 times and you got an average speed of 295. So you'd simply take the sight tapes that were provided and you would find the tape that's labeled 295. You would remove the blank sight tape here, or the blank tape that's on the wheel, and you would replace it with that sight tape that you selected off the sheet. And then you'd simply use a tool to align the pointer with your 20-yard mark. And then you're good to go. You may find that if you hit a little high, that you needed to select a sight tape with a 1 increment higher speed, or if you hit a little low, you might need to select a tape with a 1 increment lower speed, just to dial in for the perfect sight tape for your setup. Now, let's say you don't have access to a chronograph. That's probably going to be a lot of people. And in that case, we just need to create 2 points. So once again, starting at the very top and ensuring that you're sighted in at 20 yards, you're going to simply take a marker or a pin, and you're going to create a mark on this blank tape that's in line with this pointer. Then you step back to a second distance. It could be 30 or 40 yards, but just some 10-yard increment that you're comfortable shooting. And you start shooting your bow and moving the sight down until you're on at that distance. So in theory, let's say that you started out by shooting at 20 yards and you moved the sight, you're sighted in at 20, you step back to 40 and move the wheel to move the housing down until you're on at 40. Okay, now I'm on at 40, I'm gonna make a second mark on this blank tape right here. And now I know what my pin gap between my 20 and 40 yard mark is. After that, you simply remove this blank tape carefully from the wheel, and then you hold it up against the sight tape provided, and you want to correspond the gap between, in this case, 20 and 40 yards to the 20 and 40 yard mark on the tape. So you select the tape that matches that distance best, and then you simply apply that tape. And then the same is true if you find that you shoot at a slightly further distance, or just in shooting your bow more with this sight on there, that you're hitting a little high, higher than the mark, then you might need to select the tape that's 1 increment faster. And again, if you're hitting a little low, you would need to select the tape that's 1 increment slower. All right, next we're going to talk about sighting in the SWFT Trio. Now the Trio hood's not new for Trophy Ridge. It's something that we've had available in the past, and a lot of people absolutely love the Trio sight. The thing that sets the Trio apart is that obviously 3 pins in the hood, but we use the bottom pin as the anchor in this hood. So in this case, you're actually not going to start by sighting in at 20. you're going to start by sighting in at 40 yards using the bottom vertical pin in this hood. So just the same, we want to roll the sight all the way to the top, and while at 40 yards, you're going to use this toolage micro adjust for the windage and elevation until the sight is set at 40 yards. You're going to lock it back down. Now at this point, we still have the option of using a chronograph. These tapes also have those corresponding speeds. So if you have access to a chronograph, you would shoot that bow through a chronograph. I'm going to use the same speed, again, 295 feet per second. The only thing that sets the sight tapes apart from the trio is you'll notice that they start at 40 yards instead of 20 yards. And of course, that's because we anchor at 40 with the trio hood. So you would do the same thing though. You would use that 295 feet per second. You would go and find the corresponding tape at 295 feet per second, and you would put it on the sight. Now, again, you can sight this in without use of a chronograph in the same manner. But let's just remember, instead of starting at 20, we are starting at 40. So once you've sighted in the sight at 40 yards, you would step back to a second distance, either 50 or 60, obviously a distance that you're comfortable with, and you would scroll the sight down, or you would roll the sight down so the housing moves down using your bottom pin, again, in this case. And so let's say that you've moved out to 60 yards, creating a 20-yard gap, and you've rolled this down and now you're hitting on at 60. You would start by making the mark on the tape in the same way at the top position, and you make a second mark at that 60-yard position. And you would carefully remove this blank tape and once again hold up the pin gap between, in this case, 40 and 60 against the tapes, and choose the one that matches that gap the best. Once you've got the tape on, the same screw controls the position of the pointer. You would just loosen that and then make sure the pointer is lined up at that 40-yard mark, and then tighten it back down. And you're good to go. Now, since you started at 40 yards, but we do have 2 pins in here in addition, so we're set up to sight in the top 2 pins at 20 and 30 yards. And so after you've picked your sight tape and you're ready, you can simply go back up to 20 and 30 yards, and you can sight in your top 2 pins using the micro adjust screws on top of the trio housing. All right, so I saved the duo for last because it's actually a little different than both the single and the trio sights. The reason being that, yes, it has 2 pins, hence the name duo, but in this case, the bottom pin is adjustable and the top pin is the fixed pin that we're going to sight in. So the duo, we still sight in this sight at 20 yards. We're going to roll the sight all the way to the top, and we're using the top pin that's centered in the housing. We're going to sight this at 20 yards. Once again, using the toolless adjustment here for your windage and your elevation. So once you've got that top pin sighted in, the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and sight in that bottom pin. Now, you have some flexibility with that bottom pin. Obviously, 30 yards makes a lot of sense. It's the common increment that a lot of people use. You could use something more like 35. You do have flexibility in how you choose to use it. Well, let's just say they're going to sight this in at 30 yards, referencing the bottom of the second pin in this hood. You use a 50 thousandths Allen key that's provided in the package through a hole in the bottom of the housing. When you turn that Allen key clockwise, it's going to lower the pin. When you turn the key counterclockwise, it will raise it. And you just need to be careful not to over tighten it if you get to the top or bottom end of the travel range of that pin. You can adjust that gap all the way from 60 thousandths of an inch to 260 thousandths of an inch. And of course, your bow speed is going to correspond to where that pin ends up, but there's a lot of flexibility in where you set that bottom pin. So once you've decided where to set your bottom pin in and you've made those adjustments, again, you're moving that pin without moving the housing up and down. Now we're going to go into setting the indicators. Now the indicators on the duo are slightly different than the other 2, and that's because we have dual indicators to show the position of both pins, no matter where the sight is adjusted to. So when you look at the pins in the housing of the duo, you'll notice that there is a scale of hash marks on the top pin, and there's an arrow on the bottom pin that's pointing to those hash marks. So once you've got that bottom pin set, that arrow is going to point to one of those hash marks. And you simply need to go in, look at that pin, and reference which hash mark that bottom pin arrow is pointing to. You'll notice that both on the vertical tape pointers as well as the wheel pointers, there is a matching or corresponding set of hash marks. So simply looking at that top pin and referencing the hash mark that the arrow is pointing to, you will take the adjustment screw for the bottom pointer in both cases, loosen it, and then align the top edge or the leading edge of that second pointer with the exact same hash mark that the bottom pin arrow is pointing to on the top pin. And then tighten it down to set the position. The benefit of this is once you've got a sight tape on this sight, no matter where you are throughout the travel, both the top indicator and bottom indicator will give you an accurate distance that represents where your top and bottom pin are. Now, once you've got your indicator set, we can go into the same process to choose the sight tape that we did on the other sights. Once again, if you have access to a chronograph, you shoot your bow through a chronograph. Let's say your bow is shooting 295 feet per second, you would simply go to the set of sight tapes. You'd find the tape that says 295 feet per second, and you would put the wheel tape on, as well as the vertical tape if you choose to use it. And then you're set to go. Again, if you find that you're hitting a little high, you might need to go and choose the sight tape that's one increment faster, or if you're hitting a little low, you might need to choose the sight tape that's one increment slower. Now, if you don't have access to a chronograph, once again, we can do this with pin gaps. With the 2-pin sight, you're going to mark gaps using the top pin position. So roll to the top, you would make a mark on the blank sight tape in the position of the top point, in this case, the one that's corresponding to your 20-yard mark. And then you would roll down to a second distance that you're comfortable shooting. I used 40 yards in the other example. So again, if you're standing at 40, you roll the sight down until you're hitting at 40 yards with your top pin. You can make a second mark on the blank tape where the first indicator or the top indicator is pointing. You then carefully remove that blank tape, and you would hold up the 20 to 40 yard pin gap against all the tapes that are provided in the package, finding the one that matches that pin gap the best. And once you put it on, there are screws on both the vertical and the wheel tape pointers to help you align that top pointer with the top mark on the tape. All right, thanks for watching this video on how to set up your brand new SWFT sight. If you have any more questions that weren't addressed in this video, please reach out to the customer service department here at Trophy Ridge.